That night, under the cover of darkness, Adana wrapped herself in a plain shawl and followed Nena to the dungeon. Agadinma unlocked the heavy iron gate and motioned for them to enter. The air inside was damp and cold, and the flickering torches cast eerie shadows on the walls. Kelechi sat on the floor of his cell, his back against the stone wall. His once bright eyes had dulled, and his face was gaunt from days without proper food. When he saw Adana step into the dim light, he rose slowly, disbelief etched on his face. "Your Highness," he said, his voice hoarse. Why are you here?" Adana stepped closer, her heart aching at the sight of him. She placed the basket of food she carried on the ground and knelt before him. "I came to see you, Kelechi. To know you better. To understand the man who risked his life to save mine." He looked away, his fists clenched. "I am nothing, Your Highness. A prisoner, a slave. You should not be here." "You are more than that," Adana said firmly. "You are brave. Selfless. You have a heart unlike any I have ever known. Tell me about yourself, Kelechi. Your family, your dreams, everything." Kelechi hesitated, but the sincerity in her eyes broke down his walls. Over the course of that night, and the nights that followed, he shared his story. He spoke of his childhood in Abakar, of his late sister Adiz, and of the flood that destroyed his family's farm. He spoke of his parents, who had sacrificed everything to save him, and of his dream to one day build a life where they would never know hunger again. As Adana listened, her admiration for him deepened. She saw not just a man, but a soul who had endured unimaginable pain, yet still held on to hope. "You are remarkable, Kelechi," she said one evening, tears in her eyes. "And I swear to you, I will find a way to free you and restore you to your family." Kelechi looked at her with a mix of gratitude and sorrow. "You owe me nothing, Your Highness. But your kindness is more than I ever expected. Thank you." The visits continued, and with each meeting, Adana's health began to improve. She smiled more, laughed softly, and even hummed to herself as she walked the palace halls. The queen noticed the change and whispered her thanks to the gods, though she couldn't understand the sudden transformation. The king, too, was relieved, though his suspicion lingered. "You seem happier these days," the queen said to Adana one morning. "Has something changed?" Adana smiled, her heart dancing with a secret she couldn't share. "Perhaps I have found hope again, mother. That is all." But the secret meetings could not remain just a source of solace. Adana and Nena began to devise a plan to free Kelechi. They knew it would not be easy, but they also knew that love and justice demanded action. "My lady," Nena said one evening, "if we are to help Kelechi, we must act before Adana makes another move. The next full moon is only weeks away. What shall we do?" Adana's eyes shone with determination. "We will find a way, Nena. Whatever it takes. I will not let him remain a prisoner any longer." The royal dining hall was quiet except for the faint sound of Princess Adana's soft voice as she spoke to her parents. She had carefully rehearsed her words, knowing she had to tread delicately if her plan was to succeed. "Father, mother," she began, her hands folded in her lap, her tone respectful but steady. "I have been thinking deeply about my situation. I understand my duty as your daughter, and I do not wish to bring dishonor to our family or our traditions." King Alyamide leaned forward, intrigued by the calm demeanor of his daughter. "Go on, Adana," he said, his voice warm with curiosity. "I am ready to meet the man you have chosen for me," she continued, lowering her gaze modestly. "But I believe it would be wise for us to have a private meeting, just the two of us before any formal ceremonies. A marriage is a lifetime commitment, and perhaps if I could know him better, I might develop feelings for him. It would also reassure me of the wisdom in your decision." Queen Ezen looked at her husband, her face softening. "She speaks wisely, Alyamide. After all, she is not rejecting the arrangement. She merely wants to understand her future husband." The king nodded slowly, his chest swelling with pride. "You have spoken like a true daughter of the throne, Adana. Intelligent and respectful. I will arrange for Agbana's son to come to the palace at once." Adana lowered her head, concealing the spark of determination in her eyes. "Thank you, father. I only wish to honor your decision." The next morning, a royal messenger arrived at Chief Agbana's compound with a scroll bearing the king's seal. The chief read the message aloud to his household. "The king requests the presence of your son, Odian Agbana, at the palace tomorrow. He will meet the princess privately to begin the courtship." Odian, who had been lounging in the courtyard, immediately straightened, his face lighting up with excitement. "Finally, father," he exclaimed. "The princess herself wants to meet me. She has probably heard of my charm and my bravery. Chief Ogbonna exchanged a doubtful glance with his wife. Odeon, he said cautiously, this is no ordinary meeting. You must carry yourself with dignity and wisdom. Do not embarrass our family. Embarrass? Odeon scoffed, puffing out his chest. I will sweep her off her feet. Just watch. The following day, Odeon arrived at the palace dressed in his finest robes, glittering with gold and jewels. He strutted into the hall with the confidence of a peacock, flashing a broad grin at everyone he passed. The king welcomed him warmly, though Queen Ezen eyed him with quiet skepticism. Adanna entered the room gracefully, her poise perfect as always. She greeted Odeon with a polite smile before gesturing toward a private chamber where they could talk. Shall we? She said. Odeon followed her, his swagger evident. Once inside, the princess gestured for him to sit across from her. She began with a calm, warm tone. Thank you for coming, Odeon. I wanted to take this opportunity to know you better. Tell me, what do you believe true love means? Odeon blinked, caught off guard. True love? Well, he scratched his head awkwardly. True love is, when a man loves a woman, and they get married and have children. Adanna smiled faintly, her eyes sharp. I see. And what do you think is most important in a relationship, respect, communication, or shared goals? Odeon shifted in his chair, sweat beginning to form on his brow. I think maybe respect. Or communication. No, wait, shared goals. Yes, that's it. Adanna leaned forward slightly. And how do you plan to show respect to your wife if you do not understand her needs? Odeon opened his mouth, then closed it again, utterly lost for words. His confidence crumbled under the weight of her questions, and he began to fidget nervously. Adanna continued, her voice calm but unyielding. Marriage is not just about duty or appearances, Odeon. It is about partnership, trust, and understanding. Do you believe you are ready for that kind of responsibility? Odeon stammered, his face reddening. I don't know. Adanna's expression remained kind but firm. Thank you for your honesty. Odeon left the palace that day feeling smaller than he ever had in his life. When he returned home, he stormed into the compound, his face dark with frustration. Odeon, his father began. How did it go? Terribly. Odeon snapped. Do you know what that princess did? She schooled me like I was a child. She asked me questions I couldn't answer, made me feel like a fool. And you know what? She was right. I am not ready for a woman like her. His mother gasped, while Chief Ogbonna stared at his son in disbelief. What are you saying, Odeon? I'm saying, Odeon said, his voice trembling with anger and shame, that you raised me to be arrogant and foolish. You never taught me about responsibility or love. You only taught me to chase after power and pride. Well, I'm done. I don't want the princess. She deserves better. I'll find my own wife when I'm ready, someone who will see me as I am, not as the fool you made me. Chief Ogbonna's face darkened with anger, but he said nothing, while his wife burst into tears. Please like and subscribe. Back at the palace, Adanna reported the meeting to her parents. He is not a bad man, she told them, but he is not ready for this kind of responsibility. The king nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps you are right, Adanna. I will consider what must be done. As Adanna returned to her chambers, she felt a small flicker of hope. She had bought more time and with it, a chance to execute her plan to save Kelechi. The night was unusually still, with only the faint rustle of leaves breaking the silence. Princess Adanna sat in her chambers, her heart weighed down by guilt and a determination that refused to waver. Across the room, Nena, her loyal maid, watched her mistress with concern etched into her face. My lady, Nena ventured softly, breaking the silence, you haven't touched your meal. You've barely slept these past nights. What troubles you so deeply? Adanna looked up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Nena, I cannot stop thinking about Kelechi's family. I fear they are suffering in ways I cannot even imagine. How can I eat or sleep while their pain remains unknown? The maid hesitated. But my princess, asking about his family is dangerous. If the king or anyone in the palace discovers your intentions, it could bring severe consequences. Adanna straightened in her chair, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. I do not care for consequences, Nena. That man risked his life for mine, and his family has been left to bear the cost. I must know how they are faring. Will you help me? Nena nodded, her loyalty unwavering. Always, my lady. The following morning, Adanna summoned 2 of her most trusted palace guards to her private quarters. Their faces were a mix of curiosity and concern as they bowed deeply before her. Your Highness, one of them began, what do you require of us? Adanna handed them a pouch filled with gold coins. I need you to travel to the village of Abakar and locate the family of Kalechi, the man imprisoned by the king. Speak with them discreetly and learn of their condition. You are to breathe no word of this to anyone. Is that clear? The guards exchanged uneasy glances before nodding. Yes, Your Highness. We will not fail you. 2 days later, the guards returned. Adanna met them in the quiet solitude of the palace gardens, her heart pounding with a mix of hope and dread. She could tell from their downcast expressions that the news was far from good. What did you find? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The elder guard stepped forward, his voice heavy with sorrow. Your Highness, we located Kalechi's family. We were received by his father, Chijioke. Adanna's breath hitched. And how are they? The guard hesitated, as though weighing the burden of his words. Not well, Your Highness. Chijioke is a broken man. He said they have endured unimaginable suffering since Kalechi was taken. Adanna's lips trembled. Tell me everything, she urged. The guard's voice dropped, his tone laden with grief. He told us about Kalechi's mother, Mama Adiz. She fought tirelessly to bring her son back, even selling all her wares and standing for weeks outside the palace gates, hoping for a glimpse of him. But one day, she was confronted by the palace guards. When she identified herself as Kalechi's mother, they mocked her and revealed that her son was imprisoned by order of the king. Then they chased her away, calling her a nuisance and a liar. Adanna's hand flew to her mouth. Oh no! Oh no! The guard continued, his voice shaking. She returned home with the news, and the grief broke her. She lost her mind, Your Highness. She now roams the market, singing a sorrowful dirge about her son. The villagers call her Adakil because of the songs she sings while begging for alms. It is a sight of unspeakable pain. Before he could finish, Adanna let out a strangled cry, collapsing to her knees. Her sobs filled the garden, raw and uncontrollable. Nena rushed to her side, trying to comfort her, but the princess was inconsolable. Kalechi's mother is mad because of us, she wailed. Because of me. Her son is suffering for saving my life, and now she is wandering the streets, lost to her grief. The guards and Nena looked on helplessly as Adanna's cries grew louder, her body trembling with the force of her anguish. The commotion soon reached the queen's ears, and she hurried to the gardens, her heart racing. She found her daughter crumpled on the ground, her face streaked with tears. Adanna! Queen Ezen cried, rushing to her. What is the matter? Speak to me. Adanna clung to her mother, her sobs barely allowing her to speak. Mother! I cannot bear it. They suffer because of me. His mother is mad, roaming the streets, because of me. The queen's face paled. What are you talking about, child? Who is suffering? Before Adanna could answer, the king arrived, his expression a mixture of concern and irritation. What is this madness? He demanded. Why is my daughter crying in the middle of the palace like a commoner? The queen rose, trying to calm him. She is unwell, my lord. We must take her to the infirmary at once. The king frowned, his gaze lingering on Adanna's tear-streaked face. Then see to it. But I expect an explanation when she recovers. Adanna was carried to the palace infirmary, where the royal physician attended to her. Her cries eventually subsided into quiet weeping as the queen sat by her side, holding her hand. My daughter, the queen whispered, her voice thick with emotion, you must tell me what is troubling you so deeply. I cannot bear to see you like this. Adanna turned her tear-stained face toward her mother. It is Kalechi, mother. His family has been destroyed because of what we did to him. His mother, she is lost to her grief. And his father, he suffers in silence. The queen closed her eyes, her heart aching for her daughter and the broken family she spoke of. We will find a way to make things right, she promised. But Adanna's resolve had already hardened. As she lay in her bed, a single thought consumed her. She would not rest until Kalechi and his family were reunited. Adanna sat in her chamber late into the night, her mind racing. Her heart ached with a heavy mixture of guilt and determination. For hours, Nena had begged her to rest, but Adanna dismissed every plea. Finally, the princess stood abruptly and turned to her maid. Nena, she said, her voice steady despite the storm in her heart, I will confront my father. Nena gasped, her hands flying to her chest. My princess. No. You know the king will not listen. Worse, he may see it as an act of rebellion. Please reconsider. Adanna's jaw tightened. I can no longer sit back and watch innocent people suffer because of my silence. If I do not speak, I will be complicit in their pain. I must do this, Nena. It is my duty as a human being, as a daughter of this kingdom. Nena's eyes filled with tears. If you must do this, my lady, promise me you will tread carefully. The king's temper. I will handle my father, Adanna said, placing a hand on Nena's shoulder. I need you to trust me. The next morning, Adanna dressed modestly, abandoning her usual regal adornments. She chose a plain white gown, symbolizing her sincerity. Nena followed behind her as she made her way to the king's chambers. The guards at the door announced her presence, and the king, seated at his table reading documents, looked up with mild surprise. Adanna, what brings you here so early? Adanna curtsied, keeping her eyes down. Father, I beg an audience with you. It is a matter of great importance. The king motioned for her to approach, setting aside his papers. Speak, my daughter. What troubles you? Adanna took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she clasped them in front of her. Father, I come to you not as a princess, but as a daughter of this land, pleading for the lives of those who have suffered under the weight of decisions made in this palace. The king's brow furrowed. What are you saying, Adanna? Be clear. Adanna met his gaze, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. It is about Kelechi, father. The man who saved my life. The king's expression darkened immediately. What of him? He is a prisoner, as he should be. Do not speak of him again. Father, please. Adanna's voice broke. You do not know what his family has endured because of this. His mother, she choked back a sob. She has lost her mind, father. She wanders the market, singing dirges about her son, begging for alms. His father is a broken man. They are suffering because of us. The king slammed his hand on the table, startling both Adanna and Nena. Enough! You dare accuse this palace of cruelty? Do you forget your place, Adanna? Adanna dropped to her knees, her tears now flowing freely. Father, I do not speak to defy you. I speak because I can no longer bear this burden. Kelechi is not a criminal. He is a hero. He saved my life, and now his family is paying the price for his kindness. How can we call ourselves rulers if we allow such injustice? The king rose to his feet, towering over his kneeling daughter. You speak of justice? The laws of this land are just. Kelechi is a commoner, and he dared to love a princess. Do you not see the chaos that would ensue if I allowed such disobedience? Adanna looked up at him, her eyes pleading. Father, this is not about chaos. It is about humanity. Kelechi did not ask to love me. His actions were born out of selflessness, not ambition. And I. She hesitated, her voice dropping to a whisper. I love him too. Please like and subscribe. Adanna took a step closer, her voice trembling but resolute. Father, if you force me into this marriage, you may secure the throne, but you will lose your daughter. I will not be the pawn in a game I did not choose to play. The king stared at her, his jaw tightening. Are you threatening me, Adanna? I am begging you, she replied, her tears falling freely. Please, father, find another way to secure the kingdom. Let me choose my own path, my own happiness. The king turned away from her, his shoulders slumping slightly. For a moment, he seemed almost human, almost vulnerable. But when he spoke again, his voice was firm. You are my daughter, Adanna, and as long as you live under my roof, you will obey my commands. This discussion is over. Adanna felt her heart shatter into a million pieces. She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. Finally, she turned and left the room, her vision blurred with tears. Back in her chamber, Adanna collapsed onto her bed, her body shaking with sobs. Nena rushed to her side, holding her tightly. My princess, Nena whispered, her own voice choked with emotion. What did the king say? Adanna could barely form the words. He refuses to see reason. He would rather secure the throne than protect his own daughter's happiness. Nena tightened her grip. Then we must find another way, my lady. We cannot give up. Kelechi's life, your happiness, they are worth fighting for. Adanna wiped her tears, a spark of determination flickering in her eyes. You're right, Nena. If my father won't listen, then I will find another way to save Kelechi and protect this kingdom, even if it means defying the very traditions that bind us. It was a quiet evening in the palace, but within Adanna's chamber, the air was thick with tension. Nena sat close to the princess, her voice calm but firm. My princess, Nena began, I know how much this fight has weighed on you, but if you approach the king with nothing but defiance, he will shut you out again. Adanna sighed deeply, her fingers clenching the edge of her flowing gown. I've already tried reasoning with him, Nena. He won't listen. Nena leaned closer, lowering her voice. Then don't reason. Bargain. Offer him what he wants most, but make him meet you halfway. Give him a choice that benefits everyone. Adanna tilted her head, her curiosity piqued. What do you mean? Nena's eyes glimmered with determination. Tell the king you will agree to marry Odion on one condition. He must free Kelechi, send for his parents, and reward them for Kelechi's bravery. Make it clear that if he refuses, the consequences will not only hurt the family but the entire kingdom. Adanna hesitated. Do you think he'll agree? Nena smiled faintly. The king loves his kingdom and his legacy. If you frame it as a way to honor both, he won't refuse. But you must be resolute, my princess. Show him you mean every word. Adanna nodded slowly, her resolve hardening. Very well. I will speak with him tonight. Later that evening, Adanna requested a private audience with her father. The king, seated on his ornate throne, raised an eyebrow at her approach. What is it now, Adanna? He asked, his tone weary. Adanna took a deep breath and stepped forward. Father, I have come to bargain with you. This is my final plea. The king leaned back, his eyes narrowing. Bargain? Speak. Please like and subscribe. Adanna squared her shoulders. I will agree to marry Odion. I will uphold the tradition and secure the alliance you so desperately seek. But, the king's brow furrowed. But what? You must first release Kelechi from the dungeon, Adanna said, her voice steady. Send for his parents, his ailing father and his mad mother, and have them brought to the palace. Let the physicians care for them and reward them handsomely for Kelechi's bravery. Give them a house, a farmland, and a chance to rebuild their lives. The king's face darkened. And if I refuse? Adanna's tone turned icy. Then, father, I will burn this palace to the ground. I will leave this kingdom and take with me the respect of the people. Do not test me, father. You have seen what I am capable of when pushed to the edge. For a moment, silence filled the room, the weight of her words pressing heavily on the king. Finally he stood, his expression unreadable. You would defy your own father, your king, for the sake of a commoner? Adanna met his gaze without flinching. I would defy anyone for the sake of justice and humanity. But, father, this is not just about Kelechi. It is about honoring bravery, about setting an example for our people. Is that not what a true king should do? The king stared at her for a long moment, then sighed heavily. Very well. I will grant your request. Adanna's heart leapt, but she kept her composure as the king continued. I will send delegates to bring Kelechi's parents to the palace. They will be cared for and rewarded. Kelechi will be released, but... The king's eyes hardened. You will keep your end of the bargain. You will marry Odion without further complaint. Adanna nodded solemnly. I will, father. Thank you. The next morning, the king dispatched a high-ranking delegation to locate Kelechi's parents. When they reached the small, broken-down hut, they found Chijioke sitting by the door, his face etched with sorrow and exhaustion. Who are you? He asked warily as the officials approached. One of the delegates stepped forward, bowing slightly. We come on behalf of the king. He has sent us to bring you and your wife to the palace for medical care and a proper reward for your son's bravery. Chijioke's eyes widened. The palace? After all this time? Another delegate gently explained. Your son saved the life of the princess. His bravery has not gone unnoticed. The king wishes to honor your family. Chijioke hesitated, then asked, his voice breaking. And my wife? Will she be treated? She is. His voice trailed off as he gestured toward the village market. The officials exchanged a glance. She will receive the best care available, one of them assured him. At the market, the sight of the madwoman singing her sorrowful dirge brought tears to the officials' eyes. They approached her cautiously, speaking softly to avoid startling her. Madam, one of them said, we have come to take you to the palace. Your son's bravery has earned your family great honor. Adakil paused her singing, her eyes searching their faces as if trying to understand their words. Finally she whispered, Kelechi, my son? Yes, the delegate replied gently. He will be released, and you will be cared for. Once Chijioke and his wife were safely in the palace hospital, the king ordered Kelechi's release from the dungeon. The young man was brought to the royal chambers, his body weakened, but his spirit unbroken. The king studied him for a moment before speaking. Kelechi, do you know why you are here? Kelechi shook his head, his gaze steady despite his weariness. No, your majesty. You saved my daughter's life, the king said. For that, I am grateful. But you overstepped your place. A man like you has no business with a princess. Kelechi remained silent, his expression unreadable. The king leaned forward. I am releasing you, but hear me well. Stay away from Adana. Focus on rebuilding your life. If you truly care for her, you will let her go. Kelechi's voice was quiet but firm. I will always honor your wishes, your majesty. But some things are not so easily forgotten. The king's gaze lingered on him before he waved a hand. You are free to go. The morning air in the palace hospital was cool, and sunlight streamed through the wide windows, casting golden beams across Ebel's bed. She stirred, slowly opening her eyes, as if waking from a long, dark dream. For the first time in years, her mind was clear, her heart lightened by the absence of the crushing grief that had weighed her down for so long. Chijioke sat by her side, his once frail frame now gaining strength after weeks of proper meals and care. His eyes glistened with unshed tears as he saw his wife regain her awareness. Ebel, is this real? Are you truly awake? He asked, his voice trembling. Ebel turned to him, her lips quivering into a smile. Chijioke, I can see you. I can hear you. It's real. Oh, my husband. She reached for his hand, and he held it tightly, as though afraid to let go. I thought I lost you, Chijioke whispered, tears rolling down his cheeks. The pain was too much, Ebel. I thought I would lose myself too. Ebel shook her head, her voice steady yet soft. You never lost me. Grief held me prisoner, but God has freed me. And now we will heal together. Please like and subscribe. The king had been true to his word. After their recovery, Ebel and Chijioke were escorted to their new home, a spacious house with sturdy walls, a clean yard, and more land than they had ever dreamed of owning. As they stepped into the compound, Ebel's eyes widened in disbelief. Chijioke, is this really ours? A royal delegate bowed and gestured toward the house. By order of His Majesty, this is now your home, and that land beyond the hill is yours to farm as you wish. Chijioke turned to Ebel, his voice breaking. We were beggars, mere shadows of ourselves. How can this be our reality now? Ebel clasped her hands, tears streaming down her face. It is God's mercy, Chijioke, and the bravery of our son, Kelechi. This is his doing. The true joy of their new life came a few days later, as they were still settling into their home. The news reached them that Kelechi, their long-lost son, would be coming to see them. Ebel was pacing the courtyard, her hands clutched to her chest. Is it true? Will I truly see him again? Chijioke placed a calming hand on her shoulder. Patience, my love. He will come. Our son will come. Then they heard footsteps and a guard called out, Kelechi has arrived. Ebel froze, her heart pounding. Chijioke stepped forward, his voice breaking as he called out, Kelechi, my son. When Kelechi stepped into the courtyard, his face weary but his eyes filled with emotion, Ebel let out a cry and ran to him. My son! My son! Kelechi fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face as he embraced his mother. Mama! I'm home. I'm here. Chijioke joined them, his strong arms wrapping around both of them. Kelechi, you've come back to us. You're home. For a long time, they stayed there, a family reunited in tears and joy. That evening, as they sat together in their new home, Ebel prepared a simple meal with Chijioke's help, something they hadn't done in years. Kelechi watched them, his heart swelling with gratitude and sorrow. I never thought I'd see this day, he said quietly. Ebel turned to him, her eyes soft. Neither did we, my son. But God has a way of turning pain into joy. Chijioke nodded, his voice steady. Kelechi, you are the reason we survived. Your bravery brought us here. We can never repay you. Kelechi shook his head. It wasn't just me. The princess, she fought for us. Without her, I would still be in the dungeon. Ebel reached for his hand. Then she is an angel sent by God, and we will never stop praying for her. Over the next few days, Ebel and Chijioke found themselves dreaming of what was next. Chijioke, Ebel said one morning, as they stood on their new farmland, this is a new beginning for us. But what about Kelechi? What does the future hold for him? Chijioke looked thoughtful. We will build something great here, something he can inherit. But for now, let him rest and find his own path. He has been through enough. The day Kelechi was officially reunited with his parents, the villagers gathered to see the miracle. News had spread of the king's gesture, and the once broken family was now a symbol of hope and resilience. As the sun set over their new home, Ebel stood with her husband and son, looking out over the land that was now theirs. My son, she said, her voice thick with emotion, our story is not over. But tonight we celebrate. For the first time in years, we are a family again. Chijioke added, and no matter what comes next, we will face it together. Kelechi smiled, tears glistening in his eyes. Together. The air in the royal palace was tense, a storm brewing beneath its grand exterior. King Alyamide sat stiffly on his ornate throne, his expression stern but his heart racing. Before him stood Adana, his son Odeon, and a delegation of their family, their faces as cold and unyielding as granite. The weight of their arrival had already sent ripples of fear through the palace, for Adana was not a man to tread lightly. Adana stepped forward, his rich agbada swaying as he moved. His voice was deep, measured, but laced with quiet authority. "Your Majesty, we have come to discuss matters of grave importance. We have heard of the happenings in the palace, the princess's affection for a common prisoner, the king's attempts to salvage the situation, and the instability this has caused." The king stiffened, gripping the arms of his throne. "Adana, these matters are private palace affairs. What is your purpose here today?" Adana glanced at Odeon, who nodded solemnly. Then Adana continued, his tone sharper. "Our purpose is simple. After long deliberation within our family, we have decided that it is in everyone's best interest for the princess to marry the man she loves. Odeon has also declared that he no longer wishes to marry Adana." The room fell into a stunned silence, the weight of Adana's words hanging in the air like a thundercloud. "Please like and subscribe." The king shot up from his seat, his face a mixture of anger and desperation. "What nonsense is this? Odeon, you were betrothed to Adana. She has already agreed to marry you. In fact, she is madly in love with you. This is a misunderstanding. I beg you to reconsider." Odeon stepped forward, his voice calm but resolute. "Your Majesty, I have nothing against the princess. She is intelligent, beautiful, and kind. But I cannot marry a woman whose heart belongs to another. It would not only destroy her happiness, but also mine." Adana cut in, his voice rising. "And this is not just about our son's decision. We cannot align ourselves with a royal family that cannot uphold tradition or control its own house. Your Majesty, the princess's actions have brought dishonor to both our families. This cannot stand." The king's voice cracked as he pleaded, "Adana, don't do this. You and your family have supported this throne for generations. Our kingdoms are intertwined. Adana will be a perfect wife to Odeon. This foolish infatuation with the prisoner is fleeting. She will forget him." Adana's face hardened. "It is not just about the marriage, Obis. We are withdrawing our wealth, our influence, and our support for your throne. From this moment forward, the alliance between our families is broken." The king's breath caught, and his knees almost buckled under the weight of the threat. He looked at Odeon, hoping for some sign of hesitation, but the young man's face was firm. "Odeon," the king said, his voice barely above a whisper, "have you thought of the consequences of this decision? For yourself? For your family? For this kingdom?" Odeon nodded. "I have, Your Majesty, and my decision is final. I will not marry Adana." "Final?" the king echoed, his voice rising with panic. He turned to Adana. "Adana, please. You cannot let this happen. We can renegotiate. The engagement party is already being planned. Do not humiliate this throne." But Adana turned on his heel, his delegation following suit. As they marched toward the grand doors, Adana threw one last glance over his shoulder. "The humiliation, Obis, was brought upon yourself. You let your daughter's whims dictate your rule. Now you will bear the consequences." When the heavy doors slammed shut, the sound echoed like a death knell. For the first time in years, King Alyamide felt powerless. His chest heaved as he sank back into his throne, his head in his hands. The queen stepped forward cautiously, her face pale. "My husband, what are we to do now?" The king looked up, tears streaming down his face, his composure shattered. "This is all her fault. Adana has ruined everything. Do you hear me? Everything." The queen recoiled, stunned. "Obis, she is our daughter. She. Do not defend her," the king bellowed, his voice cracking with rage and despair. "You encouraged her rebellious spirit. You coddled her when she should have been disciplined. And now look where we are. Adana's family is gone, and the throne stands vulnerable." "Vulnerable?" The queen's eyes filled with tears. "Obis, this is not the time for blame. We must think of a solution." The king laughed bitterly. "A solution? What solution? My daughter is in love with a prisoner. My greatest allies have abandoned me, and this kingdom stands on the brink of chaos. Tell me, my queen, what solution do you see?" Word of Adana's visit spread through the palace like wildfire. Servants whispered in hushed tones, guards exchanged nervous glances, and even the courtiers avoided the king's gaze. In her chambers, Adana sat with Nena, her face pale but her resolve unshaken. "Nena," she whispered, "this is my fault. My father is breaking under the weight of my decisions." Nena placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Princess, your father is a king, and kings face challenges. You must stay strong. Love is worth fighting for. Adanna nodded, wiping her tears. Then I will fight. If my father won't listen to reason, I will show him that love and duty can coexist. Please like and subscribe. The kingdom of Abakar was in chaos, and the once thriving economy had become a shadow of itself. The streets were filled with despair, and the once bustling markets were ghostly quiet. The collapse began when Adana and his family withdrew their economic support from the throne. For decades, Adana had been the lifeblood of the kingdom's economy, controlling the trade of essential commodities like salt, grains, and cement. When he pulled out, it left a vacuum too vast for the royal treasury to fill. Prices skyrocketed. A tuber of yam that had cost 500 naira now sold for 10,000. Even the palace could no longer afford its luxurious expenses, forcing King Alyamide to dismiss nearly half his staff. The people were rioting in the streets, demanding relief from the king, but he had no answers. In desperation, King Alyamide traveled to neighboring kingdoms to borrow money and form alliances. Despite his efforts, organized crime surged, churches and mosques preached against the monarchy, and hunger gnawed at the people. While the kingdom crumbled, Kelechi's family thrived. The fertile farmland granted by the king yielded a bountiful harvest, and the inflated market prices worked in their favor. Chijioke, once a shadow of a man, now stood proud as he oversaw the family's booming trade. Ebel, who had endured so much, sang joyful songs as she cooked in their spacious new home. Kelechi, who had been freed from the palace dungeon, worked tirelessly to ensure their success. Yet, despite his newfound wealth, his mind often drifted to Adana. He had heard whispers of the turmoil in the palace and the kingdom, and he couldn't shake the feeling of guilt. One evening, as the family discussed their plans for expansion, a palace messenger arrived at their door. The man handed Kelechi a sealed letter, bowed, and departed. Kelechi's heart pounded as he recognized the handwriting. He carefully opened the letter and read it aloud. Kelechi, I hope this letter finds you well. I write not as a princess, but as a friend in desperate need. My father, my family, and the kingdom are crumbling. The people suffer, and the throne is losing its grip. I know you have moved on to better things, but I must ask for your help. Not for me, but for the people of Abakar. Please come to the palace. There is much to discuss. Yours, Adanna. Chijioke frowned deeply. The palace? After all they've done to you? Why would you go back there? Ebel placed a comforting hand on her husband's arm. Chijioke, remember, the princess risked her life to visit Kelechi in the dungeon. She showed kindness to him when no one else would. If she's asking for his help, we can't ignore her plea. But what can I do? Kelechi asked, his brow furrowed. I'm just a farmer. How can I fix what's happening in the kingdom? You've built something out of nothing, Ebel said gently. Maybe you can offer advice or connect them with someone who can help. Go, my son. This may be your chance to repay her. The palace was eerily quiet when Kelechi arrived. He was escorted to a small chamber where Adanna awaited him. She rose as he entered, her face pale but her eyes filled with hope. Kelechi, she said softly, thank you for coming. He nodded, sitting across from her. Your letter sounded urgent. What's happening? Adanna sighed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The kingdom is collapsing. Adana's family has withdrawn their support, and without their wealth, the economy has crumbled. My father is desperate. The people are starving, and they're losing faith in the throne. Kelechi leaned forward. Adanna, I don't know anything about politics or economics. I'm not sure how I can help. You've rebuilt your life from nothing, she insisted. You've managed to make your family prosper even in these difficult times. That shows you have resourcefulness. Perhaps you know someone who can advise us. Kelechi rubbed his chin thoughtfully. I know a few people in the cities, scholars, businessmen. I could consult with them and see if they have any ideas. But Adanna, she looked at him, her expression hopeful. This isn't just about fixing the economy. It's about trust. Your father needs to rebuild the trust of the people. That's the foundation of any kingdom. Adanna's eyes filled with tears. You're right, but my father is stubborn. I don't know if he'll listen to reason. He's already blaming me for everything that's happened. Kelechi reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand on hers. You've always been strong, Adanna. You can convince him. I'll do my part and find people who can help. We'll figure this out together. She smiled faintly. Thank you, Kelechi. You've always been there when I needed you most. Kelechi left the palace that night with a renewed sense of purpose. He wrote letters to his contacts in the cities, explaining the situation in Abakar and requesting their advice. Meanwhile, Adana prepared herself for the difficult task of convincing her father to take a different approach. Please like and subscribe for the rest of the story, and don't forget to leave your comment.